Okay, and what I want to do in this video is to continue to develop our understanding of what national income is. Now, don't forget how we've defined national income. And there are a number of ways to define it, and we will come to those in later videos. But right now, and please, 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 at all stages when you're studying economics at the macro level, the international level, so on and so forth, you have to keep in mind that production is wealth. So national income is the total value of all output produced in an economy over a specified period of time, usually a year. Do not forget that production is wealth. So what we're going to do now, if you've seen some of my previous videos, what you should see is that we've got a table that gives us information on the price and quantity of all goods produced in two separate economies, Ireland and France. Now, what I would like you to do is to pause the video now and see if you can calculate national income in each of these two countries. Okay, I hope you've had a chance to do that, and what I'm going to do now is work out the answers for you and hopefully with you, and hopefully after this video you'll get a greater understanding of how we can manipulate GDP figures to give a more telling story of the average standard of living in an economy. So if we were to look up the definition or the formula for national income, what we actually have here is its price of each good multiplied by the quantity of each good. The answer that you get to this is the total value of production of that good, in this case here, rugby jerseys. And then to that value of output, we add the price of the next good multiplied by the quantity of the next good, and though that answer there, the multiplication of those two numbers there, gives us the total value that was added to each economy from the production of rugby shorts. Okay, so don't forget, price is a measure of value and a measure of scarcity. Okay, but for the moment we're just going to go with a measure of value. So if we were to look at Ireland's case, there was 10 rugby jerseys. Each of them were valued at €100 each, so it's 100 by 10, which gives us a value added to the Irish economy from the production of rugby jerseys equal to €1,000. And then when we have rugby shorts, we have 15 of them were produced, and each of them were valued at €50. And how do we know they were valued at that? Because they were sold at that, so they were valued at least at that. And therefore we have 50 times 15, which is 750. That €750 represents the total value that was added to the Irish economy from the production of shorts in that year. When we add these two numbers together, we get 1,750. That is national income for the Irish people in whatever year this is, okay? Now, if we do the same for France, and I'll just be, a little bit quicker, okay? We multiply the price, which is the value, times the quantity of rugby jerseys, we get 3,000, and the price, which is the value, times the quantity of rugby shorts, which is 1,500. We add these two together, and we get a national income of 4,500. Now, this is the question, or the two questions that I want to ask you. The first thing is, which country is richer? That's the very first question. And you would be forgiven, and in a very accurate way, you would be correct for saying France, because the value of its total output, its national income, is bigger than Ireland's, okay? And then the next question that I have to ask is, which country is richer on average? Okay, and you may not be able to answer this question for two very salient and pertinent points. Firstly, you might not know what I mean by on average, and you should always know what you're talking about before you speak about something. And secondly, we have to kind of take into account, those of you that may have studied economics before, we don't know the populations of each country. So this question leads us on to this idea of GDP per capita, or national income per capita, or you could see GNI, gross national income per capita, and so on and so forth, right? All we're doing is trying to calculate the average standard of living of a person living in this country, based on the quantity that they have, the quantity and the value of goods and services produced that they get to share around between them. So GDP represents the value of, the total value of all goods and services produced in an economy over a specified period of time, usually a year. Now, if we divide GDP by the population, we get what is called GDP per capita. Okay, all this means is GDP per person. So what we are trying to do is establish, calculate, or find out what the average standard of living is per person in that country. And what do I mean by average standard of living? Well, what I actually mean is how much production of the total economy can each person consume on average. Now, another way you can look at it is how much does each person earn in an economy, but right now I'm still trying to focus your mind on production. So when we're looking at GDP per capita, we're asking how much of that production does each person living in that country get to consume on average, okay? Now, therefore, when we're asking that question, it is a measure of the average standard of living, and as I've already said, it represents the value of goods and services an average person in that country can consume, because what we produce, we can consume. Please try to understand that as best you can, and rewatch Money and Wealth, those videos at the start of this playlist. And again, I've said this over, because what we produce, we can consume, okay? I'm constantly saying that. So if we were to take these questions and these figures again, we're saying, okay, well, in order to calculate the average standard of living, or how much stuff or what value of stuff each person in a country can consume on average, we're going to work out GDP per capita. And we've already calculated in the previous question, or the previous slides, the GDP of each country, the national income of each country. Forgive me if I flick between the two, gross domestic product of each country. And now I'm just making up simple figures to say that the population of Ireland is 100 and the population of France is 300. So GDP per capita is calculated by this. It is GDP divided by the population. GDP of that country in that year divided by the population of that country in that year. So if we just move those up slightly out of the way, and I say, okay, let's calculate the GDP per capita of Ireland. Well, what do I do? Well, let's look at this. It's GDP divided by the population. Here is the GDP, which is 1,750, and here is the population. If I divide 1,750 by 100, I get €17.50 per person. Okay, now obviously this is far lower than the GDP per capita in Ireland, but we're just using simple numbers so it can be easily understood. Now, if I take the GDP, or the national income of France, which is the total output produced by all factors of production, the total value of all output produced in France in that year, okay, and I say, all right, well, how do we calculate GDP per capita? Well, it's the GDP, which is 4,500, divided by the population of France, and we get an answer of €15. Now, what I want you to understand is that, yes, if we look solely at figures for national income, we can compare two countries. But I think a much more accurate way, and still nowhere near perfect, filled with issues and problems, but a much more accurate way of trying to ascertain the material standard of living, what they can afford to buy in each country, is this method of GDP per capita, or GNI per capita, or whatever. There are different ways to measure national income. Right now we're just looking at GDP. And when we look at other ways of measuring national income, like GNI, all you have to do to calculate GNI per capita is simply divide that number by the population. Guys, I really, really hope this helped. Understand what we're trying to do in this video is give greater credence or greater uses to the idea of national income, and how we can compare the standard of living from one country to another. What I mean by standard of living is how much you can consume on average, how much an individual person can consume in one particular country on average compared to another. How do you find national income on average, or GDP per capita, or national income per capita? You divide whatever figure you're using, whatever method you're using for calculating national income, you divide it by the population. Okay, and I hope that you continue to understand that production is wealth, because what we produce we can consume in the long run. Our ultimate limit on consumption, which is the definition, how the yardstick against which we measure standard of living, depends on production. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.